I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. It's nice to see some familiar faces around the room. I'm very pleased to share with you that several years ago I heard that the Dalai Lama had said, "Western women will save the world." People in the room who know me know that just got me really excited. And I just wondered, what his thoughts were. Apparently he went on to say that women in the Western world absolutely have the freedom to move around, to talk about have the freedom to speak about injustice. And of course, women have an innate ability to understand the suffering and the pain of others. He went on to say, in this time in the world, we need more compassion and we need more focus on human values. So as I thought about his statement, and that's been several years ago, but I've continued to look at women differently. I've continued to think about the gifts that women have and how they could contribute maybe differently at this particular time. One of the things I want to share with you is, first of all, from a brain science standpoint, the Dalai Lama was exactly right. The Herman Brain Dominance, which is part of Herman International Company, started by Ned Herman, a GE physicist. When we look at brain dominance information, we find consistently that women weigh in on the red quadrant as their dominant cognitive preference. Doesn't mean everybody is whole-brained, but consistently with over 1 million people in the data bank, that's where women tend to weigh in. So they have gifts in that kind of area of looking through a lens of interpersonal, more relational, and when it says emotional, it means the ability to read emotion, to read and to see pain and suffering. When we look at where men tend to weigh in, we see that men tend to weigh in on the blue area, the upper left brain quadrant. And they tend to have more of the factual, not so interpersonal space that they're coming into. And so that tends to be their perspective and their lens through which they're typically looking. And I want to say it's important that we have both, very important. And what doesn't work well is when we get tilted too much on either spectrum. And having said that, I want to say that my talk is not a woman talk, but it's more a human talk. I think that in many ways we need to think about more of the ways that we can create balance in organization. Both are needed, both are very much needed today. So just a little bit of a disclaimer there, but what we're seeing in the corporate world right now is a lot of, I'm going to go back for just a minute. We're seeing right now in the corporate world a lot of desire to change culture, which I think is very positive. I recently worked with a West Coast company and they wanted to talk about the fact that they had struggled to bring women in. They were a tech company, they were in crisis mode, and they said, it's been difficult for us to recruit women, and women don't tend to stay when they come here. Even on our executive board, a woman may come, she may not stay. They knew that 75% of their consumers were women. So it was problematic that they didn't have strong representation in-house and they were not able to design for women and think about what kind of products women would need. And so we worked with them on how do they better onboard women, how do they better make women feel comfortable in their organization. They started creating some new policies to say at least 2 women on an executive board. Because what they heard is a woman might make a suggestion, no one really went with it. A couple weeks later, a man might make a suggestion and there'd be 8 men in the room who would resonate with that. So again, women were not feeling good about staying. But they were working diligently to kind of address what was going on in their organization. The other changes that we're seeing that are really very drastic in corporations, one of them is GE. GE has now dropped their performance evaluation in terms of a numerical performance evaluation, and they've also dropped the scale, the bell curve. So what we're beginning to understand is putting people on a bell curve is really somewhat demotivating and maybe even dehumanizing. It's a little bit like lining up your children and putting numbers on them. Nobody wants that. And so the new information out of the Neuro Leadership Institute is really telling us people do not feel safe and they actually feel threatened when that happens. So GE is using a lot more of one-on-one coaching, and coaching tends to build up. Regular quarterly meetings to talk about the goals and objectives and to keep very much of a growth mindset, very much a focus on growth with individuals. And so this is being done now for long enough that we're starting to actually see some of the results. And I just saw something yesterday that no numbers has meant better performance, because the conversations every month, we all want to be seen and heard. And we don't want to receive something at the end of the year, which is a rear view kind of information. We need more regular conversations. So that's what GE is doing. A lot of corporations are doing something similar. I know Coca-Cola is doing the same kind of thing, and they're really looking at the neuroscience as they start to change their cultures. Most recently, the Center for Corporate Leadership, Center for Creative Leadership produced a study with over 30 corporations, and what they said in their study is that companies are looking to change 4 things. They want to grow cultures of inspire and influence. They want to grow cultures of less command and control, cultures of more one-on-one coaching, and cultures where people are talking about emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. Most recently at BMW, at their headquarters in New Jersey, I was with them, and what they were doing is very much having a focus on some meditation. People were doing wearables that measured how much they sleep at night, and they were really challenging leaders to think about a more holistic way of working with their employees. So this is, I think, encouraging in the world of work. The study out of the Center for Corporate Learning, or Corporate Leadership, I beg your pardon, actually the one other thing they did say too is that most organizations now feel like they're in a bit of a VUCA environment. How many of you have heard that term, VUCA? It's actually a military term, and it means volatile, uncertain, chaotic atmosphere, because things are changing so quickly. And so how people learn is changing, how people, you can't just do a class for everybody because people have to learn different things, so there's more vertical learning, but it's a totally different environment. And the main thing is to make people feel safe. And in that vein, when we think about creating safe environments where there's more trust and people feel more free to speak out, the model that they're using out of the Neuro Leadership Institute is called the SCARF model. And the SCARF model is very much based on what we see in the brain, the very primal brain of humans. The human brain still thinks in terms of maximizing reward and minimizing threat. And so depending on your culture you're in, you can have people feeling threatened on a regular basis by what might be going on. Or you can have people very much in a toward state. Status just means we all want our interpersonal status. We want to know that we're as good as other people. From a certainty standpoint, we want to know that what's expected of us. What are the expectations for us in our role? And what's expected of us in a meeting? We don't want to be embarrassed. Autonomy means when we get some work to do, we'd really like to be able to do it in our way, in the way that we learn, in the way that we think, and the way that we put things together. The relatedness is all about, really the new social cognitive brain science tells us we all are about being in teams and tribes. when we come together and ideas are shared, there's kind of an alchemy that happens that we haven't always realized in the past. And that's even true for those of us who like to step away and have some downtime and some quiet time. We still like to feel that we're part of something and not an outcast. And then the fairness. What we've learned in the brain about fairness is if I see that you are being treated unfairly or you are being treated unfairly at work, it makes me feel unfairly treated as well. We have mirror neurons, so we feel the pain of others. So it's definitely not something we want to see. We're starting to use some of this science also in the classroom. I just asked one of the graduating MBA students in the entrepreneurial program, and he told me that he came in the door with a lot of fear. He had his idea and he didn't really want anybody to see it, he didn't really want to share it. He was kind of waiting, just didn't want anybody to take it away from him. But he said the more that everyone came together and started connecting on a more human level, we asked questions about where you're from and your birth order and things that, what have you overcome in your past and what's your most proud moment. As people started sharing these really human things and started connecting with each other and then did some one-on-one coaching with each other about ideas, he said there was a moment when the trust kicked in and people started to feel a trust, so they started to share their ideas. And when they started to share their ideas, he said they got better and better and better. And he said that's the reason this cohort will continue to work together even after graduation, because we have that sense of trust that I think is so important to create in organizations. So I want to talk a little bit about cultures of fear. And they do, we're seeing these great things at a corporate level, but we still have pockets of fear in organizations that just are really more in that old paradigm. And kind of what that looks like, I'll give you an example and then I'll give you some of the items that are usually present. But for me, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and I had my job was to create relationships with physicians and, to go to the different offices calling on physicians. And about once a month, is anybody in here a pharmaceutical rep? Okay. About once a month, my manager would come and work with me, and he was this very young and aggressive young man. So he would get in the car with me, and he would have a pad, and he would be ranking me through the day on a scale of 1 to 5 in a number of competencies. So as I would go in and out of these different doctors' offices, he would be observing me and asking me questions and following me and quizzing me, and it made me so nervous. It made me so uncomfortable. No matter how many times he came to work with me, I was so uncomfortable the night before and all through the day. And embarrassingly enough, I know that I ran at least one red light with him in the car. And I'm sure he was mortified. And I know, really embarrassingly, once I ran over one of those concrete things in the parking lot, those bars like this. And I remember after that he called my car coronary cab. But he still came and worked with me. But at the time, I remember as my team members would talk about kind of how he treated us, I'll never forget this. One of my colleagues said, "I am far more motivated by love than fear." And that's how we all felt working with him. And I will say that I learned so much from him about the kind of culture that I never wanted to create. And so I thank him for that. But what happens really in a culture of fear is that it's very dysfunctional, because people start to feel uncertain and insecure, and they're not getting kind of the affirmation and the feedback that they need, and so they get really competitive with each other. And they, sometimes people become, martyrs, and they're working all these hours, and other people become people pleasers. They're pleasing the boss, and they're all about being, right there the boss and proving everything they're doing. And then other people take on other dysfunctional behaviors. But the bottom line is people are competing with each other in a very negative way. And some people just get a paralysis. They're just uncomfortable and they get a paralysis. And I'm betting that a lot of you have been in this situation where you didn't really feel very safe. And so that's really what it looks like. Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Why, makes the statement that in the corporate world, we could really learn a lot from the military, because the military gives a medal to those people that rush in and save someone. But in the corporate world, we give a bonus to the person who knocks everyone else down to get to the top. And the Secours studies at Stanford tell us that about 70% of the people in those environments are disengaged. So no surprise. So what I have done in my career is worked as an executive coach for a lot of years. And as I've worked in different cultures, many of these same kind of cultures, going in, kind of seeing what's going on and working with very senior level people, sometimes C-level, sometimes the very top person, and being that second set of eyes for that person and coaching that person and helping them launch something new. The one thing that I see that I think most individuals need is what I call affirmation. I think most people are looking for affirmation, and I think it's one of the things that can really help in terms of growth, in terms of development, and I think that we all crave it, and yet we don't tend to give it. And if you look at, if you Google affirmation, what you'll find is there are about 459,000 sites with affirmation out there, but they're for self-affirmations. And I know that from a metaphysical standpoint, self-affirmations can be important and effective, but I also think that we could be giving each other more affirmation. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. I have as I think about affirmation, I was working with a student who's here tonight in the audience. She's fabulous, and she, as we were talking through this, she brought me a piece of paper that she's kept now for over 10 years that a professor had written to her and said, you really need to think about this and look at what you've done, look at this paper that you've written. And it meant that much to her that she held on to it. I think that that's the magic of it. And I think that's the reason that I think it's one of the most powerful human touches we can give. For me, and sometimes it becomes prophetic. You know, you hear the words and it can change your destiny. It can put you on a different track. For me, I lost my job. I probably shouldn't say the year, it makes me look really old, but in 1996. And so I lost my job and I was devastated. And I really did not know what to do next. I questioned myself and I questioned who I was. It was embarrassing. I felt like I was going kind of down this dark tunnel and just trying to figure out, you know, the next sales and marketing job. But I had the good fortune of meeting someone who, after a lot of questioning and spending some time with me, he said, you know, you really should think about starting a business. You have a sales and marketing background and you have counseling credentials. Why wouldn't you help people with this very pain point, going through a transition like this? And without his words, I would never have had the courage to do it. I would never have had the courage to do it. And so soon after, I did exactly that. I set up a small boutique firm and I started calling on companies and working with people when they were downsized. And I would be sometimes on site and I would work with them right away to say, you're not going to be alone in this search. And you know, we're going to look at get your documents ready, we're going to do research on companies, and I'm going to make some introductions for you. But the main thing that I did for them was try to affirm them. Try to tell them, here's what I see in you. You have this gift. Deb Richardson-Moore is in the audience tonight, so I'll share with you. Deb and I had a great conversation because she was at a point where she was saying, I have all these responsibilities. And for her, it was that one question of, in a perfect world, what would you love to be doing? And it allowed her to move some things out of her space and really go to the things that she wanted to do. And so you never know what the question is that you might ask someone that might help them get clarity about what they want to do. And so, so really an affirmation, if you look up the definition, affirmation is just to make firm, to give strength. And psychology tells us that we often define ourselves based on how other people view us. So without the telling of what people see in us that's good, sometimes we might not know that as much. And as I said, when you know that, Googling it, there are so many self-affirmations out there, it really does sort of validate that people are looking for it. So I'm suggesting for your mature consideration that you might think about, as you measure success in your life or in your organization, you might think about making affirmations part of it. And I'm talking about the affirmation for others. 3 ways that you can think about affirmations. And again, I'm going to ask you to kind of broaden your thinking about affirmations at this point. But 3 ways to think about an affirmation is really the person giving the affirmation has to feel secure enough in themselves to state the good they see in someone else. Because sometimes it can make you vulnerable. But the idea of stating the good you see in them and kind of stating, here's where I could see you using your gifts. It's amazing how many people still struggle with, where's the best place to use my gifts? The second thing to think about is really the deep listening that has to occur. When you're listening and asking really good questions of individuals, of course, what you're looking for them to do is find their own aha moments. But when you ask them, what's your most proud moment in your career? Or what's the biggest challenge you've overcome? You're hearing their strength and you're hearing what gave them the best sense of accomplishment. So those questions can really help. And then the third thing I would say is just really speaking the truth to them. When you speak the truth to someone about what you see in them after doing this sort of due diligence, you're pretty much speaking directly into their soul, and they can feel that. And so it feels different. They already know what their strengths are. They know, but they know you've seen them. You've looked inside and you've seen them. So I guess when we come back to, can Western women save the world? I think that the Dalai Lama was really looking at all of us and saying, at this time in history, the gifts of women are really needed. And I think that Marianne Williamson says that right now at this particular time, changing the American workforce, the hierarchical workforce of command and control, to a workforce that's more about collaboration and creativity might be the spiritual dilemma or spiritual quest of our generation. And so that's not easy, but I think women are uniquely gifted to be able to make that happen. I think we've just begun to use our gifts in a more corporate setting, and ideally we will be using them in the world at large. And so I think Western women can save the world? Do we think Western women can save the world? I think that first we have to see our value, and we have to know our worth, and we have to use our gifts, and we have to support each other. Thank you.